Hey everybody, welcome back to Ennoble. This is part 3 of the series, 5 Reasons Your Church Isn't Singing and How to Fix It this weekend. I hope you've been able to implement some of the ideas from the first 2 videos and are already starting to see a difference in how your church engages in singing together. Today we're going to keep going with reason number 3. The third reason your church isn't singing is because they don't know the songs. This one may seem pretty obvious, but I see this being overlooked by lots of churches and worship leaders all the time. We can't expect our people to sing if they aren't familiar with the music. In part 2, we talked about designing our worship gatherings in a way that encourages participation in order to avoid people just being consumers. But sometimes our people aren't consumers by choice. They just don't know the songs. And if they don't know the songs, they can't sing. Getting your church familiar with the songs your team leads is going to require some strategy. I see a lot of worship leaders who are singing new or random songs way too often, sometimes every single week, based on songs they like, what their favorite worship artist just released, what they hear on Christian radio that's new or popular, or what their current sermon series is. And new songs can be great and effective, but if you're doing new songs all the time, it's going to be harder for your people to know the songs you lead well enough to sing them with you. I've noticed this also tends to happen on weekends that we would consider our major weekends or our most attended weekends, Easter, Christmas, even weekends like Mother's Day. You see year after year when a major worship artist releases an Easter song the week of Easter, they time the release for early that week or on Good Friday. And churches all over the world take one listen to that song and then drop it in their set for Easter weekend. It's new, it's fresh, it's powerful, but what happens? You lead a potentially great song, but no one sings it because they've never heard it before. As worship leaders, I think we need to be a little more strategic and a lot more intentional with the way we plan songs for our church to sing, and not just on Easter, but every single weekend. So let's talk about some practical ways to better familiarize your congregation with the songs you lead at your church so that they can sing with you. The first thing you should do to help your church learn the songs you sing is build a set song bank or song repertoire for your church. You need a consistent group of songs that you're always pulling from when you sit down to plan your worship sets. This is so important for your church. Establishing a set song bank helps you easily recall what songs you're leading for your church right now, and it helps you rotate those songs regularly and evenly and intentionally, which in turn helps your church learn that group of songs to the point that they can easily sing them with you. The more familiar your church is with the songs your worship team leads, the more they can sing and the more transformational singing actually becomes. Having this song bank set and documented has lots of tangible benefits that will help you establish a more biblical worship culture and serve the people of your church. I mentioned already, it helps you with planning great worship sets with songs that your church knows. It also helps make sure the songs that you do sing cover a wide range of theological topics and doctrines, so you're not singing all songs that essentially focus on the same thing. It helps you balance song tempos and feel, so you can make sure you have plenty of fast, upbeat songs all the way to slower, more contemplative songs in order to lead your church through various expressions of worship. If it's relevant to your church, your song bank can help you keep track of the number of modern versus traditional songs that you incorporate in your worship sets, or how many songs use a choir. It can help you keep track of how many songs you have that are typically led by male versus female vocalists and what keys you usually lead them in. By creating a set song bank, you have all this information right in front of you every time you're choosing a worship set, so you can be strategic in planning meaningful sets that engage your church in corporate worship through singing, which is the most valuable benefit of all. In teams I've led, we call this song bank our Big 30, which is a term I got from one of my first worship pastors and mentors, my friend Carlos, and it just sort of stuck. Our Big 30 is the list of 30 songs we're currently singing as a church, divided into a few different categories that not only help with planning, but that ensure our church is singing a range of songs that both glorify God and edify our church body. I think 30 songs is a good starting point for most churches, but don't be afraid to start with even less. You can always add more songs later if you feel like you need more. I'm not going to go too much into the specifics of exactly what your Big 30 should look like and how to build it in this video, but if you want to learn a foolproof way to develop a solid song bank for your church and get a free template that you can use to build your own right now, check out the link in the description after you finish this video and you'll get access to all of that. So sit down with your team, build a song bank for your church, and commit to sticking to that list of songs. Use that song bank to be intentional about how you choose songs for your church and how often you repeat each of those songs and how you rotate those around in your weekly set list to help your church get more familiar with them. Now, how often you should sing or repeat a certain song really depends on your church, the culture of your church, how many songs you play each week, and sometimes it depends on the song itself. But you want to find a balance of leading a song enough for your church to really learn it well, but not so much that your church gets sick of singing it, or even worse, starts to sing it without really thinking about what it's saying anymore. And if you're trying to find where that line is, I would suggest you lean in the direction of playing a song more often than you think you should. Just because you're tired of singing a certain song doesn't mean your church is. In fact, at the point that you as a worship leader are ready to retire a song, most people are probably just starting to learn it well. As a worship leader, you may listen to a song several times to learn it. You practice that song with your team at your midweek rehearsal. You run it again before service. Then you lead it 1 or 2 or more times during your weekend services. You do that 2 times in a month, and all of a sudden you and your team are sick of that song because you've heard it 50 times. But your average church attender has only heard it maybe a few times, if that. The average person at your church isn't going and listening to that song during the week. They're not going to find it and listen to it after service on their own. And they maybe didn't even hear it last month when you led it at your church. Even the most faithful, mature believers who are there every week and are growing in their faith, most of those people still aren't going to be as excited or invested in worship music culture or new song releases as we are as musicians and worship leaders. So it's going to take longer for the church to get familiar with the songs you sing than it does for you. So be willing to keep songs in your song bank for much longer than you think they should be. When you're ready to throw a song out for good, chances are your church is just getting to really know it. As a rule of thumb, I try to lead most songs in our song bank at least once every 2 months, with newer songs being sung much more frequently at first and older songs less frequently as the church becomes increasingly familiar with them. If a song starts to feel stale or played out, switch up how you lead it. You can keep a song fresh by finding a new arrangement or changing the key and who leads it. Maybe you find a male-led version instead of the female-led original you usually do. Or you can totally change the feel of a song or where you play it in your service so that it elicits a different kind of response. Maybe you do a typically upbeat song in a way that's slower or more stripped down in a time of reflection instead of as an opening song. And making changes like that can help an old song feel new again. And if a song has become so familiar that people can sing it maybe without really even thinking about it anymore, that can help your church kind of re-encounter the lyrics and the scriptural truth of that song as they engage with it in a different way that makes it impactful again. Some really familiar songs that you've just about run into the ground, think like Build My Life or Living Hope, that a lot of churches have been singing for years at this point. I'm sure you can think of some potentially overplayed songs at your church or some common hymns that we've just been singing for generations. Those songs might purposefully only be sung occasionally. I like to actually remove those from our current song bank and keep them in a separate list of just a few familiar songs that we can keep in our back pocket and bring back in very rare, specific, high impact moments. That can be a great way to keep things both familiar and fresh. Singing a song every once in a while that you're confident your church knows, even if it's been a long time since your church has sung it. You might not have sung Heart of Worship or Great is Thy Faithfulness in your church in the last 5 years, but it's safe to assume that a well-planned chorus or stanza of one of those songs could be a really powerful moment of congregational singing in your church gathering. So don't be afraid to throw back to songs that you know are familiar every once in a while. I know the concept of having a set song bank to choose your sets from every single week might seem limiting to some of you, but this doesn't mean you never introduce new songs. And I actually think it becomes a lot easier and more natural to introduce new songs as you become more intentional with your song bank. It becomes part of the strategy. As an older song becomes too familiar or feels played out, just swap that song out for a new one that's comparable. If I'm going to take Living Hope out of my Big 30, I might try to find another mid to slow tempo song that's a declaration of the gospel and a celebration of the freedom from sin that we have through new life in Christ, and put that song in Living Hope's place. That keeps my song bank fresh, but it also keeps it balanced. And I can still set Living Hope aside and add it to that list of songs to bring back one Sunday when it could be a great moment or make a big impact. And keep in mind, when it comes to introducing new songs, that new doesn't have to mean newly released. A new song can be any solid song that's been around for a while, but is still new for your church and new in your rotation. I think sometimes we get stuck thinking like, man, I'd love to do this song, but it came out 3 years ago or 5 years ago. If it's a great song, I say go for it. When it comes to choosing those new songs to introduce to your church, make congregational singing a top priority. Ask yourself if each song you want to sing is a song that your church should be singing and will be able to sing. We'll talk more about that in part 4. Make the song's content the most important thing. Prioritize solid lyrics and sound theology in any new song you want to teach your church. And then consider the tempo and the feel of the song. Think about your church context. You should even think about your team and their abilities. Not every new popular song is a song that should be sung in corporate worship, even if it's advertised that way. And not every song works for every church. You may need to work really hard to find strong songs that work for your church and can be effectively adapted by your team for congregational singing. But I think that's time well spent, and it'll make a huge difference in your church in the long run. As you introduce new songs, be conscious of when and how you introduce them as well. Remember, the goal is that your church knows the songs and sings them with you. In general, I recommend most church worship teams that play 4 to 5 songs a week teach only one new song every 6 to 8 weeks. That means between 6 and 9 new songs each year. And that may not sound like many for an entire year, but it takes time for your church to learn new songs to the point that they're comfortable singing them. So take your time getting your church familiar with new songs before you move on to another one. Be sure to sing a new song more often the first few months so your church has several opportunities to hear it and begin learning it. When I'm introducing a new song, I like to sing it the first time, repeat it the following week, skip a week, and then sing it again. So that first month, you're playing the song 3 times, 3 out of 4 weeks. Then the second month, I'll include it in at least one more worship set, possibly more. So at that point, your church has heard the song 4 or 5 times, and they should be starting to learn it well. And if the song just isn't landing, at that point, you'll know. It should be rare if you're careful with how you choose new songs. But if you feel like the song just hasn't connected like you expected it to, and people aren't starting to sing it well by that point, don't be afraid to cut it loose and choose another song. I recommend on those weeks you're singing a new song that you keep the rest of your worship set very familiar so your church can still sing the majority of the service. Doing 2 new songs or even multiple songs that are relatively new in a single worship set can leave your church feeling disengaged overall. You want them singing more than not singing. So keep the majority of the set really familiar when you're introducing something new. This is the strategy I'd use for teaching that new Easter song that we talked about at the beginning of this video. If you've got a great new song that you want your church to sing together on Easter, don't wait and surprise your church with it on Easter Sunday and then expect them to sing it passionately. Start introducing that song early, even a few months in advance. Introduce the song, repeat it a few times, but plan to give it a 2 or 3 week rest before Easter. When you bring that song back and you sing it on Easter Sunday, you've got a fresh new song to incorporate in your Easter set that your church is excited to sing again, but is also familiar enough with to sing together corporately. And if the song isn't released until Good Friday, it'll be a great song for next Easter. In my opinion, it's just not worth it. The last thing I'll mention on new songs that I think is really important is when you do introduce a new song, you should teach that song to your church first. Taking a moment to teach a song before you lead it gives your congregation some immediate familiarity with the song. It's an opportunity to tell them what the song means, how it's rooted in scripture, and if it's done well, it helps them get familiar with a small part of the song that they can sing corporately right away. So before leading the whole song, take a moment to briefly set up and explain the meaning of the song, then teach them a chorus or a bridge or a refrain by singing just that section of the song 1 or 2 times before you play the full song. I like to set up a new song by reading the scripture it's based on or by explaining its theology as a way to teach and encourage worship as a response, like we talked about in part 1. This teaches your church how the song helps us respond to a biblical truth about God. And teaching the chorus or the bridge of the song before playing it through gives your congregation some lyrics and a melody to quickly learn and hold on to. The first time you lead that song, you're singing multiple verses and choruses and bridges. Your church is going to be trying to learn all the lyrics and the rhythms and the melodies. But if you've taught them just the chorus beforehand, they'll be able to look forward to that chorus as an opportunity to join you in singing. They may not know much of the song, but now they know the chorus. So they listen as you start singing, they reflect, they internalize, and then everyone can sing that chorus together each time it comes around. So rather than just sticking a new song in a spot in your worship set without acknowledging it, take a moment between songs and say, hey, we're going to sing a new song together this morning called this, and it comes from whatever Bible passage, or it talks about whatever the main idea of the song is. So we're going to teach you the chorus now, and once you catch on, we'd love for you to sing it with us. Let's sing together. This is really simple, but it gives your church a biblical truth to respond to, and it quickly enables them to join in that response. So teach your church a new song before you sing it together as a way to help your church with song familiarity. You can also introduce new songs in what a lot of churches call special music song slots, where the congregation is seated and expected to engage more through listening and reflection rather than corporate singing. If that's a regular part of your service, I think it's a great spot to teach a new song because it allows people to ponder and internalize the song before being expected to sing it themselves the following weeks. You could also post a clip of one of your worship leaders singing a part of the song or explaining what it means or where it comes from the week before you sing a new song. There are lots of ways to do this, so get creative and keep in mind that the goal is to familiarize your church with a song before they're trying to sing it together corporately. And that leads right into our last point, which is that when it comes to your church knowing the songs you lead, consider that Sunday morning shouldn't be the only time your church is able to get familiar with the songs you sing. After you sit down and build a song bank for your ministry, make that song bank available to your church so they can listen to those songs if they'd like to. Put it on your website, build a playlist your people can stream during the week and encourage them to do that. At the very least, you should make a list of the songs in your weekly worship set available to your church after the weekend so they can go find any songs they didn't already know or just that they enjoyed singing. You can do that on screen at the end of your service. You can post the songs the next day on social media or your website or your app, or you can put them in your bulletin if you print one. But I'd encourage you to consider taking this one step even further. I think as creatives, we tend to want to surprise the congregation with the worship set we've crafted. We want them to experience the journey of the worship set for the first time in a moment of congregational worship together on a Sunday morning. It's pretty typical that no one outside of those planning or serving even thinks about the service until they show up, and then whatever happens, happens. But Sunday doesn't have to be a secret. I challenge you to be willing to let your church know the songs for the weekend in advance. Give your church a chance to listen to and learn the songs before Sunday so they can be ready to sing when they come to gather together. Remember, pursue the spiritual over the creative. This is another instance where I think laying aside some creativity for the sake of spiritual edification can really pay off. Imagine the difference it would make if we were more concerned with people being prepared to sing than we were being wowed by our creative arrangements or our band or our production value. All those things are secondary to people engaging in a response of singing together. So it might hurt a little bit or feel a little weird to let people know what's coming. But if you're concerned your church isn't singing because they don't know the songs, I think it's worth it to do whatever it takes to get people more familiar with what you're leading. And your church knowing what songs you're going to be singing doesn't automatically mean your gathering will be boring or predictable. Even if people have a heads up on the songs you're singing that weekend, they won't know the order of service or the arrangements you have planned or how it ties into the preaching or response. You can still keep things fresh with song structure and tags and song reprises and impactful transitions. You can still be creative and craft a really meaningful, powerful worship set that engages people as they participate in it together. So don't let that stop you. The bottom line is go out of your way to make sure your church is familiar with the songs you sing together starting this Sunday. Here are some suggestions for how. Number one, Take the time to build a set song bank for your church and commit to sticking to that song list when you plan your worship sets over the next couple months. Trust me, watch and see the difference that this makes. You can follow the link in the description to learn how to build the perfect song bank for your church and to get a free Big 30 template that you can use to make one today. Number 2, look at the worship set you have planned for this weekend and swap out one less familiar song for one you're certain your church is familiar with. If it's late this week, don't do it this week. Don't do that to your volunteers, but do it for next week and make sure that the majority of your worship set is songs you know your church is familiar with. Number 3, the next time you sing a song that's new for your church, take time to teach it first. Use scripture and explain the meaning of the song and teach a chorus of it before you sing the full song arrangement with your church. And number 4, display the songs in your worship set on screen or post them online for your church either after your service on Sunday or a few days before your next weekend so people can keep familiarizing themselves with the songs that you're singing together as a church. The more familiar your church gets with the songs you're leading every week, the more they'll be able to engage and sing with you in worship together. I'd love to hear some creative ways you do this for your church, so feel free to leave those below so we can help and encourage each other in this. As always, thanks so much for watching. I hope these videos have been helpful for you so far. We've only got 2 more to go, so we'll see you in part 4.